Russia's currency is currently collapsing and the central bank seems to be giving up, while the head of the SVR, the Foreign Intelligence Agency, is still defiant in his proclamations when it comes into regards to future peace negotiations. This is happening while there are attempts to increase the aid significantly to Ukraine before Trump takes office. But we'll talk about this as well as about the developments along the front lines in this situation report about the war in Ukraine. We have more details about the ATACMS attacks now. It was the Ukrainians have reported that 5 ATACMS were used against an S-400 system in Lotarevka, north of Kiev, and another 8 ATACMS were used on the Khaino airfield. That was the airfield that was attacked, where supposedly another S-400 system was damaged, even though I have not seen any proof of this. The Russians have used on the night towards the 26th of November 4 Iskander-M and a record number of 188 Shahid drones and other drones, so the biggest drone attack so far against Ukraine. Vadim Skibitsky says the Russians have now 200 KH-101s and 300 Iskander-M on stock, showing that the Russians keep a significant strategic reserve in their long-distance strike weapons. There are unfortunately more videos of executions of Ukrainian prisoners, as I basically have to report almost every situation report we're having by now. Let's switch to the developments along the front line, and here we have the Russians attacking south of Novoivanovka. We have a geolocation here that they have reached this point. Now they are likely occupying or having reoccupied, liberated, however you want to call it, Darino, and the fighting is still going on in Novoivanovka. We now see that they have advanced a little further south, roughly up to here, over the road here. They have once again been attacked and probably been defeated, but we see their advances slowly creeping southwards towards Sverdlikovo here in this direction, so they are slowly gaining ground here in Kursk. That was all that I have to report from the Kursk Oblast. We're switching over to Kharkiv. Here the Russians have crossed the border in skirmishes with small groups. The areas being reported are Kosacha-Lopan, Kudivka and Hoptivka. So the Russians have sent sabotage groups roughly here. According to the reports that were defeated, there are no reports of the Russians having occupied additional Ukrainian territory. That was likely just smaller incursions, probably to fix Ukrainians in place. So no change in the control of territory that I can confirm here in the area of Kharkiv. We switch over to the Eastern Front, and here a quite significant change has happened. The Russians have crossed the Oskil River directly south of Novomlynsk here. They've crossed it, according to reports, with boats. They managed to cross over and gain a foothold on the other side. This is northeast of Dvorichna, roughly, 25 kilometers, I think, from 20 kilometers from Kupiansk. We'll have to see how it continues here. Obviously, for now, they will probably have trouble getting mechanized units over on the other side, but we'll have to see how this continues. The Ukrainians are reporting that they cleared Kupiansk from Russians again, that they managed to push the Russians out and destroy the Russians still inside of the city, and I do not see any contradicting things, so this seems to be true. The Ukrainians likely have full control over Kupiansk again. That was it when it comes to the changes along the front line. The Russians might have advanced a little bit south here, south of the street, but I do not have full confirmation of this. So we switch over to the Eastern Front south of the Siversky Donetsk. Here we have the Ukrainians reporting fighting around Siversk and Chasiv Yar as well. I do not see any change in territory. The Ukrainians are reporting that the Russians try several times per day to cross over the canal. Here south of Chasiv Yar. According to the Ukrainians, they're doing it during the daytime because at night with the colder weather, their thermal drones are more efficient in recognizing the Russian soldiers, and thus they're easier to attack. According to the Ukrainians, they are only doing this with 2 to 5 men groups because of the threat of FPV drones. Very, very small groups, and so far, at least according to the Ukrainians, they have not been successful. I do not have anything to prove it otherwise. No fresh reports from Toretsk and New York. We switch to the area of Pokrovsk, and here we have Petrivka being confirmed as having fallen towards the Russians. We have them in the northwest, and we have them in the center here, and we have the pro-Ukrainian deep state map admitting the complete loss of Petrivka. So for now, we can confirm that Petrivka has fallen to the Russians. The Russians have also managed to gain closer to Shofte, south of the reservoir or the lake here. Before they have only been reaching it through the northern route. Now they've gained additional control over it and have a wider base to attack Shofte over the coming days. They likely also took Pustinka here. So far, I cannot fully confirm that it's under Russian control, but from what I've seen, it very likely has fallen to the Russians as well. And west of Novo-Oleksivka, they also advanced here in the direction of Pushkine, further gains by the Russians here. The Ukrainians are reporting attacks in the direction of Pokrovsk, so roughly this area here, 5 to 6 times a day with groups of 10 to 20 men, so a little bit bigger attacks here than in the area of Chasiv Yar. In the direction of Kurakhove, we have the Russians now being west, having advanced west of Voznesenka. This area here is now under Russian control as well as they have advanced along the railroad down here and taken over all of this as well. So they keep eliminating the pocket that is now between Voznesenka and Kurakhove. The Ukrainians are continuing to withdraw from that direction. The Russians also took additional ground west of Dalnie. I cannot confirm fresh changes in Kurakhove. The deep state map has now confirmed that they lost completely control over everything east of the river, but that was already more or less assumed from my side, so I do not see a significant change. According to the deep state map, the Russians control a high-rise here in the center of Kurakhove, but according to them, they would have just infiltrated, and the rest of Kurakhove in this area here would be under Ukrainian control. We'll have to see to how much of this is true. I already showed you in the last situation report that the Russians had actually reached the high-rises already. Further south, the Russians are in the town of Yelisavetivka. We have that here, geolocated. First, they were in the southeast. Then they were further north of it. I do not have a confirmation of them being in the western part, but it seems likely that if Ukrainians are still there, they are very likely in the process of withdrawing, as the Russians are getting closer from every direction, are in the process of cutting lines of communication, and have advanced further to the west as well. Here they have advanced north in the direction of Konstantinopolsk. They are only 1 kilometer away from the last line of communication for the Ukrainians in all of this area here. If the Russians advance 1 more kilometer to the north and take Konstantinopolsk, or at least block it, then the only way out for the Ukrainians in this area would be across the open fields in this area, where obviously right now with the weather, the mobility would be limited. So I would guess they are in a fighting withdrawal from this area here. Further west, we have the Russians also gaining additional ground around Rivnopil. They have taken additional ground to the north of it, getting somewhat closer here to the main road, to the main line of supply, main line of communication west of Kurakhove, but overall not too much has changed there. We also have an advance though between Novodarivka and Rivnopil. Here in this area I have a geolocation as well, where they have advanced up to this. More a detail than too important, than too significant. This is, you can see the river here, and this is visible here. So the Russians have reached to this point. Again, with the Russians already on both flanks, it's likely that the Ukrainians are withdrawing from that area and the Russians are just following up. But for now, the front line has probably moved to this point. That was it with the changes in territory. We have some general information from the Kupiansk area. A Ukrainian battalion commander is claiming that the loss ratio in Kupiansk is 1-5. So for one Ukrainian soldier, the Russians would lose 5. That's not completely impossible, as before the reports were there, including from the Russian side, that there's no solid front line and the Russians are using small groups, 1 to 2 men sometimes only, to infiltrate into the lines. And obviously, if they get ambushed, if they get overwhelmed, if they get too exhausted to keep up their vigilance, they will be likely taken out. That this is effective enough for them to inflict higher damage to the Ukrainians is far from certain. So I can't say much. I think it's not completely impossible, but obviously that would be a very optimistic assessment in regards to the Ukrainians, because 1-5 loss ratio is probably what they would need consistently to withstand the attrition warfare over the long term. The Russians are, according to Ukrainians, also preparing a big offensive in the south, likely aiming at capturing the town of Zaporizhia. The Russians, according to the Ukrainians, plan to do this with 130,000 men. Their own Kursk offensive has delayed the offensive, though, as the Russians have withdrawn forces from this area to reinforce in Kursk. So when this offensive will now start, we have no idea, but I already talked about it in the past again and again, that the Ukrainians are afraid that a big offensive will start in this direction. And we have the current commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, General Syrskyi. He said that Ukraine will have to start a counteroffensive. Only with the defensive, the war is not to be won. Likely next year, but of course, he's of course right. You can attrit the enemy with defensive only, but you probably won't win the war without going on the offensive yourself. But in the current situation, obviously, we have to ask ourselves with what material, with what personnel. There a lot of things will have to still change for Ukraine to have the ability to conduct a serious counteroffensive, but a lot of things can still change. We'll have to see in the long term. There obviously troop generation will be an issue. And here we switch over to the Russian side. Reuters is reporting that the North Koreans are increasing the size of their factory for the KN-23 short-range ballistic missile. This is a missile comparable to the Iskander-M, so 500-kilometer range, more or less fairly accurate, and the North Koreans have already delivered likely 60 of them to the Russians, and apparently they want to deliver more, or Russia has ordered more in North Korea, allowing the North Koreans to increase their factory sizes, their production capabilities. Putin has also signed a decree that would give 400,000 rubles to Rosgvardia members, so whoever is already serving in the Rosgvardia, if he switches over to the Ministry of Defense, again, obviously a sign that the Ministry of Defense, the army, is in dire need of personnel. We talked about it here a couple of times, and if I don't forget it, I'm going to link up here a video about Russia's manpower problems right now. In the political sphere, we have Sergei Nyarishkin, who is the head of the SVR, the Foreign Intelligence Agency. He says negotiations are only reasonable if the reasons to invade Ukraine are eliminated as well. Basically, he basically means that the war goals stay the same. The so-called denazification, meaning subjugating Ukraine's government and making it a puppet regime, demilitarization and neutralization, so no alliance and no more military to speak of, so Russia can act within Ukraine whatever and however it wants. A freezing of the front line or a demilitarized zone make no sense, according to Narishkin. I talked about it in the past as well, that I think this is a fairly unlikely scenario, but we'll have to see from the Russian side. Obviously, though, we have no sign of willingness to freeze the war anytime soon. The ambition, obviously, are still continuing over the occupied territory, and quite significantly, though. Russia is in the process of getting the requirements done to take the Taliban off the terrorist supporter list or terrorist list. This is clearly aimed at allowing a diplomatic recognition of the current effective government of Afghanistan. Whether this will lead to some military support as well is obviously a different question, but right now it's thought that this is mainly aimed at working together with the Taliban fighting ISIS-K, who had done terrorist attacks in Moscow and in southern Russia as well. The Prime Minister Fico of Slovakia has accepted the invitation for the 9th of May victory parade, as he said, with pleasure when he was invited by Putin. So a Prime Minister of the European Union is going to go to Moscow on May 9th and stand beside Putin to show his support for Russia in this context. Then we have a survey from Ukraine about a potential current presidential election. Obviously, the Ukrainian law does not stops any elections during times of war, so there won't be a presidential election. But a survey has said that right now, Valery Salushny, the former commander-in-chief and current ambassador in London, would be the most likely new president, the most likely contender to become the new president if there was a new election. Volodymyr Zelensky's support has now shrunk to 22%, basically half of the support in regards to Salushny. The biggest news for today is probably that the ruble is collapsing right now. At the time of recording, the price is at 113 rubles for $1. So 1 ruble is less than a cent as of now. And the latest news is that the central bank has stopped any currency purchases, basically giving up on the current situation. To be perfectly honest, my economic knowledge is existent, but not much more than this. So I'm not going to talk about some potential results of this when my knowledge about the topic is somewhat limited and I didn't have the time to read into the consequences. But that this is not a sign of strength and not a sign of a booming Russian economy, I think we all can agree in this context. And finally, we have international support being said. Oh, now first, we have one more thing. We have Dmitry Medvedev saying that the new red line is giving Ukraine nuclear weapons. So the red lines keep shifting inside of Russia. To which degree this is a surprise for us is a different story. And obviously it shows how far the red lines have moved so far. When we think about any Western aid initially being a red line, now we are talking about transferring nuclear weapons, that they are now being red lines. I don't think anyone is seriously considering this. And this is the very least thing that is extremely unlikely to happen in this war. Finally, in international support, reports are that Sweden is giving the spare parts for 14 Gripen fighter jets to Ukraine. That is confusing to everyone involved, everyone commenting and reading it, because the Ukrainians do not have Gripens yet. So what kind of spare parts they are, unless they are building kits to make your own Gripens with it, which is fairly unlikely, it's unclear. So whether that's a translation error and it actually means like the weapons for 14 Gripen, which could be air-to-air missiles that might be used on the F-16 or something like this, is unclear. But supposedly the spare parts for 14 Gripens are coming. Maybe the Gripens will follow soon, and that's the reason for it, but we'll have to see. This might also be spare parts being used on Gripen in Sweden to train Ukrainian soldiers. As said, the details are not fully clear yet. And finally, we have the reports that Biden wants to increase the military aid to Ukraine by an additional $24 billion, $16 to replace stocks of the US Armed Forces. So it's being booked under US aid towards Ukraine, but it's actually just purchasing weaponry and equipment that is going to be given to the US Armed Forces, and thus staying within the United States. $8 billion would be aimed for Ukraine, though, under this. It seems like US Congress will have to sign off on this, so we'll have to see. This is probably going to give us an initial guess how Trump will handle the whole situation after his inauguration, as he will likely talk to the US congressmen of the Republican Party to coordinate with them how they will vote on this. So if this Biden additional aid goes through Congress, we know that it was likely done after Trump gave the green light, giving us some glimpse of understanding what he might do afterwards. And good news for Ukraine as well. France has dropped the Buy EU demand for the Brussels Defense Fund. The European Union has money that it wants to buy weapons from, but France has insisted on buying them only within the European Union, so nothing from Australia, Great Britain, United States, Canada, or Israel, or any other friendly pro-Western or Western nation. Now this is going to be dropped, and thus allowing a more efficient use and obviously a faster purchase. But that was already it from me for today for this situation report. If you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up. It helps with the algorithm. Leave a comment. What do you think about the current situation with the Russian ruble? Do you understand? Do you see what it will mean for the Russian economy? What can we expect over the coming weeks and months after this has been shown to us? And if you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss future videos. This channel is only possible because of the support of viewers like you. If you like to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. But that's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.